About 8 weeks ago, Sharon came to me and asked me if I would come back and keynote the PTC again with the what I call the four wise CEOs from around the world and talk about where we see happening as we look into 2021. And we had a really good discussion in September, October timeframe of this year, and things have changed a bit since then, and I think we're now looking at a series of different realities that we hadn't thought about necessarily in that first time we had these discussions. So I'm really excited to put some questions to our four speakers and see what they have to say about what's going to happen in the new world, and give us some predictions as to what they think will happen as we look ahead into the near term. I'm really going to talk about really just two main things. One is what I call the elephants in the room, which is, as all of you know, we've as an industry, we've really become very heavily interlocked with what we call the OTTs, which are the over-the-top players such as Google, Facebook, Microsoft, and the reality is, what is their future in this new world? And we saw in the recent face-off with the President of the United States, the first time technology companies actually had to take political sides or get into the fray in terms of massive political decisions. So there's some key implications for that, and whether that will actually then dictate going forward whether we actually move into an era of where these companies are heavily regulated or even broken up. The second area, the other elephant in the room, is obviously what's going to happen between the United States and China. Both economies are the pillars of growth for the world, and when you think about technology, there's a huge intertwining between the technology industry in these two countries, and as they start to face off, we face some very interesting challenges as we start to think about how technology will move forward in an era if there are two rivals. And then what I want to do is then switch gears and think about the last time we presented, we talked a lot about COVID and what does that mean and how does that change our lives, and what does that mean for telcos? I want to go back to that and then talk about a little bit about the ICT growth numbers across 2020, and then what do we consider to see as we get into 2021 and beyond. First, let's talk about the elephants in the room. The irony is that the first breaking up or challenge to the OTTs in a big way happened actually in China recently with the Ant IPO that was blocked, which raised the question by the Chinese government about whether tech was becoming too large and too powerful in these countries and having too strong of a voice in politics. And so there's that then followed on as we went through the United States election and into the post-election gymnastics and what came with that in terms of the question that was raised was, is it right for these technology companies to be as dominant as they are, or should we be looking at regulating them going forward? And this is a key question that we'll pose to our various CEOs. And I think the reason when we think about this, if you look at this slide, today, and this slide is actually dated, they've actually grown by another 17% since this slide actually was done. Facebook, Alphabet, Microsoft, Amazon, and Apple now today represent almost 60% of the market capitalization of the world. And the challenge is this a healthy environment for us? We've never had this type of market capitalization, concentrated in the hands of so few companies. And the question we'll ask to our hosts is this sustainable, or do we see this changing over time? Do we see new companies joining the fray, or do we actually see this a regulation coming into the market going forward? As we sit here in Hawaii and around the world, and if we'd actually been here with our colleagues from across Asia, probably one of the biggest things on their mind is what is the impact for all of us as China and the United States square off? And I don't care whether you're in the submarine cable industry, the data center industry, the cloud space, you are impacted by this, whether you're looking at technology decisions, where you're going to land your assets. Everyone is thinking about this trade war that has started to happen and seeing actually the blowback that has come out of it, whether it be cables being blocked coming into the United States or cables being blocked coming into China, or infrastructure companies being sold in various markets. So the question that we will pose to our experts is the standoff going to have an impact on U.S. telcos going forwards? And just to give some backdrop for our folks before they talk about it, here's just gives you a brief snapshot of how big these markets are and why it's such a major issue. Obviously, the internet market, China's the largest in the world. When it comes to internet, smartphones, mobile internet, mobile payments, they dwarf even the United States in terms of users. Obviously, the United States is the largest when it comes to actual revenues from these platforms. So the reality is they both are the largest in these key areas. If you go to my next slide, you actually will see one of the key things is you look to that bottom corner, you'll realize that companies like Qualcomm, Micron, Broadcom, Texas Instruments, Apple, Intel, in some cases, anywhere from 20 to 55% of their businesses are interlocked between the United States and China. And the reality is there is an intertwining of these companies. And if they were to, at some point to be a massive trade war that actually escalated, the challenges would be for some of these companies, would they survive in this environment going forward? So, a very interesting question to pose to our hosts and to see whether they actually have a view on this. I'm always a bullish guy when it looks to the future, and I think as we think about post-COVID, the question that many people are raising is, did we come up with a lot of new technologies and new ways of being productive in the world, and will that then translate to a sort of euphoric growth period that's going to add on to the growth that we've seen in technology and telecom services during the COVID period? Or are we going to go back to where we were before, and will there be potentially even a decline in growth as we go back to our old ways post-COVID? And these are some of the questions. And as you look around the world, I mean, there has been, massive growth in certain areas. If you look at technology cases for COVID, obviously remote work, probably the biggest change that we've all seen is that something like 93% of the global services workforce has actually at least spent 60 days in the last year working from home. Obviously, remote education, almost 50% of students around the world have been working from home at some point during the last year. Online socialization, if you look at many of the ways that we sell and distribute products, has gone from traditionally offline to online, and almost if you looked at things like gaming, has actually moved to almost 75% online. And then if you also look at companies like Amazon, Alibaba, and you can actually see the shift around retail, where in many cases, up until last year, almost 80 to 90% of retail was actually done in person, with people going to shops, restaurants, etc. Whereas you've seen a massive shift towards commerce and retail being done over the internet. And then finally, one of the biggest areas has been public health, and I've actually watched as I've got aging parents and grandparents, and I've watched as actually telemedicine has become a major play in the United States, but also here in Hong Kong where I live, as doctors have chosen not to necessarily get in the same room with their patients, but able to diagnose. So some of these things, and these have actually had, if you think about broadband and services that telcos or data center operators deploy around the world, this has been a major uptick in demand for all of us, and has given us a very, very positive outlook as we look to the future if these trends continue. Well, I think we've seen that there is pretty massive increases in network usage and data centers and cloud as a result of the work from home initiatives and obviously the education initiatives. And I think we've also found that from a worker efficiency, most of your sort of entry-level workers and sort of first-level management have found that working from home is much more efficient, saves time on commuting, allows better balance with family, and has found that it actually is a better way to go in many ways for doing their jobs. Now, if you look over at the management side of it, there are a number of executives that have said, well, one of the challenges with the COVID and working from home is there's a lot less oversight, so it's very difficult to really see what exactly employees are doing on a daily basis and on an hourly basis. And also the challenge is for collaboration in terms of sharing workflows and knowledge flows that typically could be done with whiteboards or diagrams and sort of exchanging of ideas, but visually between people. And I think many managers have seen that this has declined quite a bit in this sort of remote office operation, and they feel that that over time it may be better to have in-person type meetings to actually make a lot of these things more effective and more efficient. So it's interesting. There are some contrasting views on this coming from sort of the senior executive ranks versus sort of the working level ranks. So I'll put that to our CEOs, whether they think this is reality or whether it's a something that is just a few CEOs that are just old school and can't see things the new way. Okay, well, I think one of the big challenges as we think about 2021 is that while telcos and data center companies had been having a pretty good run even before COVID, the challenges that have come obviously are there has been a real streamlining of the market, and there has been also a lot more competition reintroduced. So as you start thinking about fiber and data centers in Asia alone, if you look at the data centers, there have been as many data center companies announced in 2020 as there were operating in the region, that is on a regional level in 2019. So essentially it's doubled in size. Latin America has almost doubled in size in terms of the numbers. In the telco space, there's also been, I think, another flip side, which is there's been deployment of new technology, which is 5G, and there's been a massive impact onto the telcos in terms of what this means for them. On a positive side, in many cases, many telcos are abandoning traditional fiber footprints and looking at 5G as an answer for that last mile. But also at the same time, they've actually had the challenge that they can't be in so many other services because 5G is a real CapEx drainer, and it's one that actually requires quite a bit of capital for them to do it on a nationwide basis. And if you actually look at one of the things that's sort of interesting is that we have started to see a break in the technology and telco averages. If you look at telcos in the last year have largely sort of gone down to lower trading multiples of 5 to 6 times EBITDA, whereas the technology and actually media companies have started to move into sort of the 15 to 25 times EBITDA range. And why this is important is many of these companies are integrated companies. And if you look around Asia, for example, there are telcos that operate in the media space, that operate in the data center space. And the interesting thing is they deploy $1 of CapEx. What actually happens? Do they actually get a return on that capital going forward? And one of the questions that we're going to post to our 4 CEOs is it better to be a pure play, or is it better to be one of these integrated telcos? And personally, after looking at it over the last year, I would argue that for telcos, as we start to get into services like 5G, reality is they are going to have to become focused. And if you look at fiber operators, they're going to have to become focused. Data center operators are going to have to become focused. And you actually will see that for any one of these companies, if they spend $1 of CapEx into these other expansionary services, they generally don't get the rate of return that actually benefits them at the most. And just to show you, if you look at data centers, if telcos invest in data centers, investors will give them 7 times the value of that capital dollar if they invest in a data center. Meanwhile, if a data center operator spends the same dollar, they will get 16 times that value. And so you can start to see the reality is that the market, the stock market actually doesn't give value to telcos to actually be in all these diversified ways of operating. And they actually are looking very much at how do they focus going forward. I think this will actually mean that there will be divestitures, there'll be doubling down on different types of technologies, and I think that it'll actually start to drive a different type of strategy for telcos going forward. But it'll be interesting to see whether our CEOs here have the same view that it'll be pure plays or these will be integrated plays going forward. Now what I'd like to do is open up my questions to the various CEOs, and let's have a very interesting discussion over the next 20 to 30 minutes.
Okay, what I'd like to do really quickly here is just run through a quick introduction, just as we go across the top of the screen for those of you joining us virtually. Bevan Slattery joins us from Brisbane, Australia. Bevan has been one of the key entrepreneurs in our industry, whether it be in the fiber space, the submarine cables, data centers. He's done it all. Still sits on the boards of Megaport, NextDC, and obviously is on his way into other ventures, which he'll talk about, I think, as we go through this later on today. Keri Gilder, the new CEO of Colt. She's actually been in the chair, I believe, since May of this year. Formerly was a fiber expert, using her expertise with Sienna, running Sienna's Europe business, but a longstanding technologist and someone that's obviously got a very good view for us from Europe. Bill Stein, obviously, who joined in 2014, has been one of the key CEOs in our industry for the last 6 years, has really taken DRT to a different level. It's almost 4 times the size it was when Bill took over. So he's had a fantastic run as the CEO of DRT. And then finally, Dan Caruso, who has just recently retired, but who arguably built the fastest growing fiber asset in the United States with Zayo over the last 10 years, and has been a great thinker in our industry. And we're very excited to have him joining us today. What I'd like to do is just to kick things off, just to throw it over to Bill Stein and say, Bill, you know, as you start thinking about these, there's been so much media hype around what we call the technology companies, partly around the U.S. election and what happened there. Do you see things changing for those companies, or do you think they're just going to be continuing on the path they've been?
You know, Bill, it's hard to say. I think that when you think about, at least in the U.S., the incoming administration's priorities are most likely going to be around COVID-19 and getting the economy going, at least initially. And so I would think that other topics, if you will, or other issues like the regulating or forcing divestitures in the technology industry are certainly unlikely. I think it's unlikely in 2020. But I think I think all bets are off as you look forward, because it's such a rapidly changing environment when you consider the nexus of technology and privacy and society and politics. And I think we're going to have to wait and see how that all plays out a couple of years out.
And thanks, Bill. And Dan, what's your thoughts? I know obviously you're sitting there in Colorado, and it's where do you see things headed? I know you've had a chance now in your retirement to probably pay attention to some of these other non-operational issues. So what's your thoughts, Dan?
Yeah, for the record, I'm not retiring. I don't think I'm going to retire for 30 more years. But it's almost unimaginable what has happened in the U.S. over the last 90 days. I'm sure it looks odd to the rest of the world, but if you're sitting here in the U.S., we could never have seen things that have happened. And the tech companies are in the middle of a lot of it. And there's been the thought of taking Parler down from AWS when Parler, maybe has done some things that are different, but they had some different point of views than, say, Twitter had. And Twitter's been used as a vehicle for things that a lot of us would be firmly against. Yet no one ever talked about taking Twitter down from the internet. There's been taking individuals down, not just President Trump, but others. And there's some justice for that. But the ability of the tech companies to all at once decide what they think is appropriate and not appropriate, I've got to believe there's going to be an aftershock of that. But to Bill's point, the aftershock won't be immediate, because you have a new administration coming in who has been the beneficiary of some of that mindset, and are bringing some of those people into their administration and are focused on COVID-19. So my guess is it's going to be a delayed effect, but there's going to be something that settles in and said, how did this all happen? And you've got the whole, what you went through, Bill Stein, earlier in the presentation, the amount of equity value concentrated within these companies, and the amount of activities they're involved with. That's just one big sign of the power that they're gathering. And I got to believe something's going to come of that over the next 2 years to 10 years. Yeah,
it's a fascinating time. Obviously, obviously sitting over here in Hong Kong and looking in, I know that you guys have watched this play out. And as an American, it was a pretty scary thing to watch from afar.
Yeah.
And Keri, you must be sort of feeling that too. I know the EU is always, and unfortunately, I've been in the telco space for too long. So I remember every single large telco deal would make its way to the EU, and they would have a view on whether it was non-competitive. Do you think the EU is going to start to regulate these OTTs? Is that what you're hearing from over there in Europe, or what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I think there were some articles that were just released recently about EU raising the stakes to curb big tech. You look at the new draft that just came out on the Digital Markets Act that warned, that the EU will break competition rule, will break the competitive market up, and they will fine them, up to 10% of their global revenues. That's a significant amount of money. What we saw with GDPR, I think, will be coming forward against big tech, because if you look back a couple of years when GDPR was put into place, what happened was big tech were the #1 contributor to the fines. So will there be more rules and regulation? Absolutely. I do believe that the EU will lead in some of that, just like they led in GDPR. Will they be able to break up American icons while standing on European ground? Absolutely not. I just don't see that that's possible, but I do see that the rules and regulatory environment will come to, on a grander scale and maybe even faster because of some of the things that Dan just mentioned. With the new administration coming into the US, the Europe can focus more on the rules and regulations and faster because they don't have the distraction of a new administration coming into play.
Yeah, I think no, it's interesting because there's 3 articles I think that have come out like in the last 2 weeks in Europe about sort of some leading comments about how they see the things playing out. So no, it definitely is it's on the back of people's minds, I think. Bevan, you're always the guy down in Australia with sort of the matter-of-fact way of looking at things. I mean, does this really matter, or is the underlying demand? I mean, because you've always, when I've talked to you, you always tend to look at things as sort of black and white, and you just look at demand and supply. And I mean, will it really change anything, even if we did break these companies up? Would we still see the demand numbers that we're seeing now, or what's your view on the sort of the economics of the industry? Bevan, you there?
It is a good question. I think, I think what's happened in the US in the last 90 days, and I think big tech has officially crossed the Rubicon, as the expression, if you remember Julius Caesar, when he decided to kind of go against the Republic and kind of literally cross the river against the orders. I think the cancelling of I'm not even going to get into politics and left and right and whatever it might be, but cancelling presidents, and please take this from an outside view inwards to the US, right? And I think that's a really important distinction that was made by both Dan and Keri. Is Americans typically take the American out view of them, not the world view in. I think cancelling the president's, cancelling the leader of a country's access to a platform, it's a big thing. And it's a decision that's made. I'm not saying it's the right or wrong decision. I'm just saying there are consequences to that decision. I think the second one about Parler that you made, Dan, was really quite accurate. I mean, when you look at what's going on in the internet, and I've got greater fundamental concerns about the actual fabric of the internet than probably most people have. I did make the comment last meeting we had not long ago. I said that the change was probably going to come from Europe, not from America. But I think there's absolutely going to be breakups of the OTTs. I think it's going to be accelerated because of this. I think it is going to come from Europe. But I think what the bigger concern now is what's happened from a fabric of internet situation. Making the decisions in which they have are not through law. You're finding I'll give you an example. Uganda, coming into the elections, have now banned Twitter and I think Facebook leading into the elections, and it's actually interesting, and I've always been libertarian, but it's actually quite interesting when you want to sit down and have an argument against them. You sit there and say, well, we're all for an open internet. Well, the opposite is just applied. I mean, there isn't really quite an open internet happening right now. I think that there's impacts of that. But I think secondly, Uganda can easily point, and I'm not saying this is justified, but can easily point in saying, well, look, Cambridge Analytica completely changed the US election through Facebook and actually use that platform as a vector to impact the election, if you believe what you hear from various people. And then you have big tech and Twitter, for example, saying, we've actually had to curb a whole series and cancel a lot of accounts because they were spreading misinformation. So the Rubicon that's been crossed here is that there's actually now legitimate reason for governments to actually say, if we're going to hold an election, it's actually prudent for us to actually cancel Twitter and cancel Facebook for the duration of the election, because obviously there's misinformation that's there. Now, I'm not saying it's justified, but I'm not saying it's correct, but you can actually take a justifiable approach to that, because that's what happens over here. I think that the other thing that I'm worried about the fabric of the internet with what's happened with OTT is, and this is again the fabric of the internet, I'm really concerned about anarchists. I'm really concerned about the physical infrastructure that we have. I'm really concerned that at some point people are going to take things into their own hands. And, I'm going to point out to you, a couple of cities that when the riots happened, Seattle riots, Washington, D.C. riots, New York riots, Los Angeles riots, San Francisco riots, on whichever side, different riots, different reasons. Now, I'm going to go through some of the key locations where the internet infrastructure sits in North America. Seattle, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Washington, D.C., and New York. Now, if at some point these organizations try to want to cancel people and anarchists want to do that, there's a real issue here. So I think the crossing of the Rubicon's occurred. I think we're in for some pretty significant disruption. I'm actually more concerned about the foundation of the internet than I am about people's political persuasions.
Interesting. Yeah, we're at sort of a time that we've never seen ever in our lives before. I think we've been building up to this more and more information. It's the first time actually that everyone's finally taking a step back and saying, okay, oh my God, have we gone too far on some of this stuff? It's very interesting to watch, but it's certainly, it's going to be 2021 is going to be defined by, I think, some of these policies and how actually the world sort of changes after all of this. I think just to keep things moving down the track. Thanks, Bevan. I thought that was excellent in terms of it is a challenging environment, and it's always good to get your perspective from overseas, because I think you sort of have a kind of a way of looking into the United States, which I think is a very good viewpoint. As we think about China and the U.S. I think it'd be interesting, Bill. Obviously, you're probably you've got probably the largest business. Well, Bevan also has quite a bit in the region, but and I guess Keri does too as well. But how do you see this whole China-U.S. situation playing out, Bill? And do you think we're going to have more of a trade war, and does it affect your business, or do you sort of just work around it? How's DRT attacking this situation right now, and with your China assets versus your your rest of region assets? And this is really from a perspective for folks that are operating in the region in Asia.
Sure. So to be clear, we don't have any assets on mainland China. We do have a couple of assets in Hong Kong. And we don't have any particular insights as to how Xi or the Chinese Communist Party will evolve their position towards U.S. tech. But having said that, we think it'll be a combination of pragmatism and nationalism. And either way, we're not overly focused on it. And that's because we think that the secular trends rather than political factors are most likely to influence our business, whether it's in Asia, the US, EMEA, or LATAM for that matter. And by that, I mean the rise of 5G, AI, Internet of Things, blockchain, and other trends will continue. And we think we're extremely well positioned to support our customers globally who are going to need our help in solving their complex IT infrastructure, connectivity, and workload use cases across their network and peering hyperscale and low latency computing and big data. So to sum it up, for us, I don't think it really matters. I think it's just the tremendous growth in data and that will create significant demand for the products that we provide.
Well, it's interesting. I realize you're sort of on the edge of thinking about China, right? And you haven't necessarily made the plunge. Some of your competitors have put a leg into China, but you've pretty much stopped at Hong Kong, I guess, so far. Bill, right? That's
and part of that was a concern about political instability and how they view property and contract rights, which are clearly very important for the business we're in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think maybe Keri, I think, just to throw it over to you, I think just because I think also you're running a business in the UK, and I remember that obviously BT is highly dependent on Huawei, or was for a long time, right? And obviously the UK, I remember David Cameron had done quite a bit with the Chinese in terms of technology sharing in the UK. I mean, how do you see things playing out in Europe and the UK with all these trade wars going on? Do you think will you continue to be able to use a lot of these products, or is it going to impact how you build networks going forward?
I think the core area that it's affecting right now is the 5G rollout. So if you look at the UK did ban Huawei into the 5G networks, and that was a decision that was made, early last year. And what has followed since then is the EU's published a toolbox of recommendations, so to say, to the member states. And what they've said is that, they would like to restrict or exclude high-risk 5G vendors such as Huawei, and Huawei is actually named in that toolbox recommendation. Now you see the UK making a very strong stance against vendors like Huawei, saying that they are, non-secure and high-risk vendors. Right now, it's really been centered in the 5G area, and the same thing in EU. We have a ban, the EU does not. France and Germany are heavily pushing against a total ban, because if you look at Deutsche Telekom, if you look at, you mentioned BT and EE earlier, if you look at Vodafone, these are all vendors that have aggressively used Huawei in their infrastructures, and a ban on using Huawei is really going to do damage to those incumbent providers throughout Europe. So, they're holding strong against a total ban, because it will be extremely detrimental to their cost basis going forward. And I think that's something that the EU does have to consider. At the same time, if you look at Colt and some of the fiber-rich providers, and we have less than 300, Huawei CPE devices in our entire network across 29,000 buildings, 900 data centers, et cetera. So, for us, similar to Bill, yes, we're paying attention just so that we can understand the macroeconomic environment that's going on and how that affects our customers. But for us making engineering decisions within our infrastructure, it really is, it's very independent and nascent in that environment. So right now it's really around 5G.
Yeah, no, it seems like that seems to be the hotbed of most of the challenges is going to be in 5G, and sort of the fiber sort of technology, internet type stuff seems to be kind of softening a bit. So it's not as big of an issue, I think, as it was probably 6 months ago. Yeah, no, it's very interesting though to see how that will play out. Obviously, you're not so much of a mobile operator, but many of our members are, and so they are sort of struggling with that whole 5G sort of technology footprint. And I know that the PTC is actually talking to this in some of the later sessions, so it'll be an interesting how it kind of plays out in those discussions. What I would like to do is think about one of the things that just to switch gears now a little bit towards COVID. I think Dan was fantastic. We were talking about a lot of the business models that come out. He was talking about self-driving cars the last time we were in the group, and some of the things that had come out of COVID. And just, I think, Dan, standing from your perspective, do you think businesses have fundamentally changed, or have we just kind of pivoted because of COVID, and we're going to pivot back to sort of where we were, 2 years ago when the vaccine sort of gets herd capabilities across the world, and we're actually traveling on planes and stuff again? Do you think we're back to the same old model? What's your thinking, Dan, from sort of your spot there in the U.S.?
Yeah, when we last talked, most of the discussion about the change was very directly related to COVID. But as the last few months have played out, there's these other interrelated trends that I think are equally and maybe more powerful that are going to drive more change. The way the stock market, both public companies but also private valuations, have reacted has been beyond what any of us could have guessed, which has added fuel to the funding of big ideas, deep tech, ambitious business plans. The SPACs in the US have risen almost out of nowhere. I mean, no one talked about SPACs 2 or 3 years ago. Now you have these multiple SPACs being created that are funding kind of big ideas at high valuations with a lot of cash. So with this whole trend and all the political security, safety type issues that have arisen, you put all these things together, and the amount of fueling of big ideas is so different today than it was a year ago. That so many people want to put money to work and chase things that before would have been probably difficult to fund, or maybe you could fund at a small scale by some off the beaten path investor. Now the funds are looking for these gigantic ideas, whether they're around quantum, which is an area I've spent a fair amount of time with, cryptocurrency, med tech, biotech, and all the more obvious things associated with COVID, whether it be entertainment, gaming, communications. But you put all this stuff together, we are not going to go back to 2019 environment. We have accelerated so much in so many different ways. I think the world's going to be fundamentally different each year for the next several years.
Interesting, yeah, because I think it's you bring up something. Obviously, the SPAC has become the new idea. And it's actually not just our industry. There's been some in the medicinal marijuana, everywhere from anyone that's come out with a new way of doing something or looking at something. It's interesting, sort of watching from my perspective. It has been a fascinating way, because many times entrepreneurs had to go to private equity or to angel investors. Now they can go directly almost to the public markets with an idea, as opposed to an actual operating business. So yeah, it's every investment bank right now has got their SPAC teams that are around doing this. So yeah, it's interesting how you see that going. But do you also see, in terms of tech, do you think there'll be fundamental changes? You think after, what do you think the world looks like in 2 years when COVID sort of ends? Do you think we sort of go back to just the way we work? Do you think it's going to be completely different, or do you think it'll be back to sort of the way we were in 2018? Dan, what do you think?
I think there is going to be the tension you described earlier. There's going to be companies and executive teams who have trouble getting comfortable with the more liberal work environments, and they're going to be inclined to try to get back to where they were before. But to some degree, the cat's out of the bag, and there's a lot of the most talented type employees who just won't return to that environment. They're going to seek an environment where they have more flexibility. And therefore, companies who figure out how to overcome the challenges of, call it a more liberal work environment, they're going to be able to attract the better employees. And my guess is those are the companies that are going to do well over time. A lot of companies, if they just go down that path, it's going to be hard to get their own companies to work. So they may or may not have that option. Most employees like the more flexible work environment. Sometimes that brings out the best employees, but often it doesn't bring out the best. It brings out kind of the other side of that. And boy, you're going to have to be pretty adept as a company in developing a culture, developing technology, in order to be able to collaborate, be able to innovate, be able to be competitive. And that's, not everyone's going to figure that out.
Yeah, no, I think it is a huge challenge. And I think it's, you're right. Some of the best employees, I think, that are in this environment like the fact that they can live wherever they want and actually, dial into work every day, right? So, I mean,
they will. If they work for you or not will be their choice, but they will find environments to work that way, whether their current company allows for that or not.
Yeah, I think that's Bill Stein. I'd be interested to get your perspective because I think a lot of these DRTs spread pretty wide, right? And you've got a lot probably. I mean, it's interesting. You must have a fairly large proportion of your workforce that does work from home at any given time, right? And what do you think, Bill? Do you think they're going to come back to offices, or what's your thinking?
I think we're going to leave it up to the employee, provided their job doesn't sort of require that they work in an office to be close or to be associating with other employees. And I mean, you're right. We've run a very distributed workforce for a long time, including a distributed executive team. I'm in Austin, which is our new corporate headquarters. Our head of ops is here in Austin. Our head of HR is in Dallas. Our CFO and general counsel and head of IR in San Francisco. Our chief investment officer is in New York. So, and our head of sales is in Toronto. So it's, so clearly we don't have to, the executive team doesn't have to be in the same office to make it work. Now, pre-COVID, we would make an effort to get together in person once a month for a day, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. And for longer than a day, say once a quarter. But we've recently, we're looking at, positions that'll be moving off the coast to Texas, whether it's New York or San Francisco. But we've also identified a number of positions that are fine to work from home. And so I think it's going to, for us, it's a hybrid model. But I will tell you that the trend is, in our case, is definitely to shrink the office footprint. We're not going to need as much office space, and we'll probably be creating hotel space for a lot of our employees.
Yeah, it seems, I think there is a hybrid trend coming, and I think it's actually, it's for a lot of it. It's interesting because even in Hong Kong, where the real estate is extremely valuable, the real estate firms are actually seeing it. Even many of the, these office towers they're going to be downsizing, and many of the banks taking a lot less space. A lot of the technology companies taking a lot less space here. What do you see in Australia?
I'd rather own data centers built in office space today.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and I think maybe some of that real estate will start to be converted, or some of that land will start to be converted into new uses. So it's Bevan, what are you thinking? Obviously, I know you've come from Brisbane, where things are pretty informal. Do you think what's your thinking on how this is going to play out in terms of post-COVID?
Yeah, I think the panelists are pretty much bang on. With my Megapod hat, all our North American operations were people effectively working from home since we started. There's a couple of serviced offices around North America, so there's no real change there. And then similarly in most other countries around the world. But I do, some of my businesses where I'm in my office here at the moment. We're kind of changing it. So we just asked the team to come in for 2 days a week effectively. And every second Friday, we've made the conscious decision that one of the things you miss when you don't network, when you don't actually meet with people, is the cooler conversation around the bubbler, those kind of conversations. So we're basically every second Friday, we're blanking out from about 11 o'clock, for a team get together. We always find some kind of cool place to go to, bowling alley or whatever it might be. Like, that's cool. Anyway, but we go somewhere like that, and but we'll actually have a bit of a workspace, have a 1 hour conversation about the week, whatever, do the activity, go bowling, have lunch, and have drinks. So pretty much the 5 hours that we're there, we're actually not talking work. Pretty much, we're actually just meeting people, doing an activity, having those side conversations that you don't typically get kind of team build. So I think, and then from a global standpoint, we're going to get everyone, wherever you are in the world, we'll get you in every quarter, to have a meeting, certainly for the, once things open up again. So I think the hybrid piece is going to stay and people are going to work where they are. I think people are going to start to realize one of the things that they miss, though, is that human interaction. So we'll need to come up with interesting, unique solutions to do that. But also I think software is going to play a big part of that. I invested in a small Australian firm called Intelli HR. And what they do is one of the key platform things that they do with Intelli HR is they actually help you gauge how your distributed workforce is feeling. Are they engaged? Are they motivated? All those kind of things. It actually gives you a dashboard of how that's going. So hybrid's there. We're going to spend some more quality time together, I think, and we're going to start using tools and platforms to kind of help bring people together on a united platform.
Interesting. Just to finish it off, Keri, how are you managing through all this? It's obviously you had probably one of the harder jobs, which is you sort of got your job in the middle of COVID. So you sort of had to, this is the only environment you've known as a CEO, I guess, at Colt, at least. So it's got to be, you've got to be doing some interesting thinking because it's, you've never really known being the CEO of Colt when it was normal, I guess, right? So how's it going for you and how do you see things?
No, you're right, Bill. I didn't. But, at the same time, I try to look at this as an opportunity more than a challenge. And I think it's exactly what it's done because as a CEO, newcoming CEO during a pandemic, I was able to reach actually over 70 of my top management team in less than 3 months. I would have never been able to do that in a real live environment. I've been able to do coffee chats with the, first line field teams across the entire company. Again, something I wouldn't have been able to do if we waited to do those in person. So in some ways, I actually think it's created a more inclusive environment and one that actually enables more accessibility. Now, be it you don't get the pulse sometimes, like Bevan was saying, of the organization, and that's hard to read in this type of environment. But I think it's here to stay. I mean, they say a habit takes anywhere from 18 to 254 days to form. Today is the first day that the infection was born in the UK. It's well over 254 days, even if you're on the long end of that new formation of a habit. We've created new habits. We've created new behavior of our employees, of our customers. The mental mindset of being in this remote environment has changed dramatically. And because of that, we will not be able to go back to the way it was before. That just doesn't exist anymore. I mean, you look at Ireland. Ireland is actually now passing the Ireland National Remote Work Strategy. And what that does is actually mandate remote working permission by companies if they're going to do business in Ireland. So for me, that's just, Ireland's usually one of the first within Europe. And we see that with the OTTs that are in Ireland, but now with this remote working, they're on the forefront of this as well, enabling that remote environment to continue to exist. And I think what we have to do as leaders in the industry is ensure that we are creating that inclusive culture when we do go back to the offices and we are hybrid, that we're not creating a second level of diversity beyond, gender or race or anything else, but there could be a diversity problem between home and remote working. And I think we have to be very cognizant of that and start really considering some of the tools like Bevan was just talking about with tele-HR and others to drive that behavioral change at the management level.
Excellent. I think you're right, and it's interesting. I think we could have an entire session on just this, right? Which is how do you manage in the new environment and some of the new tools? Because I think there are some great tools coming out that are going to help us do this going forward and make it much easier for us and some of those traditional managers that feel like they've got to have complete control. I think there may be some ways for them to operate in this new world, hopefully, as we all start to move through this. But no, it is interesting, and it's certainly an interesting time. We've got about 7-8 minutes left, so I wanted to kind of just get just what I wanted to ask is each one of our four panelists, just to get an idea of, I'm going to sort of throw 3 questions at you, and each one of you to kind of answer my, where do we see this? Do we see our tech and telecommunications industry up or down in 2021? Do we see the market? Will the Dow be higher or lower when we come to PTC next year? And then finally, COVID's at 650,000 cases right now around the world, I think today, or it was yesterday. Where do we see that? What's the number we'll be seeing when we're at hopefully sitting in Hawaii drinking Mai Tais together next year? Will it be 100,000? Will it be 0? And where do we end up? And maybe I'll throw it to you, Keri, just because you're, where do you see our industry? Where do you see the stock market? And where do you see COVID? Just to sort of throw 3 quick questions at you.
I think this is an opportunity for our industry. So if we make the right moves, we create the right ecosystems, we partner the way that we need to, I definitely think that there is hope that the industry will overcome this environment that we're currently in, and we will be in a good place this time next year. I think the Dow is going to go up. I think that we've seen that continue. Granted, there's some changes with the administration and big tech is going to change, but that doesn't usually happen in the first year. So, maybe in 2023, I would answer differently, but in 2022, I won't. Cases will definitely be down. They won't be gone by this time next year because I still don't think vaccinations will be completely out to the entirety of the world by that time frame. And so therefore, we're still going to have to be wearing face masks and taking precautionary measures. But I do think there's a possibility that we will be having that Mai Tai.
Good. Dan, what do you think? What's your view of the world? Do you think our industry is going to be up or down, stock market and COVID? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I think our industry will be up. But I think everyone's got to have their eyes wide open relative to how they navigate. In some cases, valuations have gone up pretty materially. If you look at data centers and tower companies, a lot of private transactions take place at very high valuations. Yet some of the public, particularly if you're in more traditional telecom, that has not been the beneficiary, and there are some underlying challenges that are faced when there's this big of a shift. But let's face it, communications is only going to be more important in all of its forms as you look forward in time. So there's going to be a way that that the industry is going to be able to capitalize on it without a doubt. As far as the Dow, I think it's going to go up, but I know 2001 is a long time ago, but doesn't feel that long ago if you lived through it, like a lot of us lived through it, and you just don't know. I built up a cryptocurrency kind of position starting in March, and it felt really good because it went up 4 or 5x, and I just sold it all because I'm like, something just doesn't feel right. Yet I haven't done the same with stocks. Stocks, I look at the same thing. I'm like, well, why aren't you inclined to sell any of those? What makes you keep them and retain them and not sell them? I don't know, but is there going to be a big adjustment at some point? At some point, there's got to be. Is it this year? Maybe not, but who knows? It's so easy to print money and distribute money and not have a price to pay, but that can't continue forever. And I'll let the rest of them opine on COVID.
Bill Stein, thanks, Dan. I think, it's always good to get your perspective on these because I think it's, you do see, you're always sort of at the leading edge on a lot of this stuff. I think partly because you're, obviously Zayo was in so many markets in the US and you get a chance to see a lot of the telecom growth or not growth. And obviously you've been a major player both on listed companies in the past. So. Bill Stein, what do you think? What's the you think all the industry's on its way up? Stock markets, where do you see it, and sort of what do you see with COVID? Do you think you'll be playing golf in Hawaii a year from now? What's your thinking on that? And you're on mute, Bill. Bill Stein, you're on mute. Sorry. There you go.
I do think the industry will continue to benefit from the digital transformation that's occurring around the world. So I don't think there's any doubt about that. I think that there will be very good growth in our industry. And I think the growth in the industry should result in relative outperformance for the industry in the equity markets, even though the values are high. My concern about the overall market really goes to what happens to interest rates and what happens to inflation. So I would think that the market could be slightly up by the end of the year, but I don't think it's going to be hugely up. And as far as COVID, I think we will be playing golf and having Mai Tais. I think that the vaccines are definitely rolling out. I would hope that there would be herd immunity in a year for sure. I, for one, have had my first dose, and I'm scheduled to have my second vaccine at the end of January. And I know a number of people who have. So I think that with the vaccinations, I think you may still have some COVID, but I think it'll be very modest.
It's good to hear your optimism. And it's unusual that they let the 35-year-old guy get his shot so early. Well done.
It's Texas.
Good for you. I'm glad. You look fine. So, you're not growing horns, so it looks like it's a good sign for the rest of us, at least that are on the call. Bevan, why don't you bring us home, as they say? What do you think on video growth, the Dow or the Brisbane market for that matter? The Aussie markets, and finally COVID. What do you think? Are you going to be alongside us at the bar along the ocean there? If you can also name the bar, that would help, because I'm trying to. My mind is escaping me. But what's the place we have the Mai Tais next to the beach
Tapa
there?
Tropics Tapa.
Tropics. That's right. Sorry.
Yeah, buddy. Good question. I was talking to a banker friend of mine, and I said, if it was this time last year, or even I was talking about December, if in December, you sat there and said to someone, okay, the Dow's at 27,000. Let me tell you what's going to happen this next year, right? We're going to have the biggest pandemic we've seen in 100 years. We're going to have disruption in the United States. We're going to see all this stuff go on. Do you think the Dow is going to be the same, lower, or higher than what it is today? Now, I think everyone would have said, unemployment doing this, everyone would have said the Dow is in the toilet, right? Obviously, the Dow is, 30,000 plus. So the reason I tell you that story is I don't know. I think you're right, Bill. I think that when the party ends, it's going to be starting, the end will probably happen with, bonds, I think. I think that's the thing. But in saying that, if we go back to the .com, Dan, you mentioned before, there was actually a really interesting kind of thing that really precipitated that. It was actually the antitrust case that was brought against Microsoft, if we remember that back in the day. So kind of quite interesting when you kind of look at the conversation we just had in the market that we're having right now. And, so I think 2021 is going to be bonkers. In terms of COVID, I think the world will mostly start kind of coming out of the haze that is COVID. I'm not sure about Australia because one of the blessings and curse that we have is I think the last 2 or 3 days we've had no community transmission of COVID in Australia, like zero in the last 2 days. So, we're roaming around going free and generally free in restaurants and things like that, which is pretty hard to believe when I talk to all my friends in the Northern Hemisphere. And they're going to probably hold a bit tighter than they maybe should to protect all of that. So I think, ironically, by being really successful in eradicating it, at least before the winter turns up again, I might not see you at PTC. I think most of you guys will probably be there, but I might not be because I'll have to probably still spend 2 weeks quarantine coming back to Australia if they're trying to protect their success they've had so far. I think that's so. I'm hoping to see you there at PTC next year, and the Yard House and the Tropics Bar and the Tapa Bar and all the bars. But we'll see what happens. The Irish Bar. I'm not sure if I remember it, but but I hope to see you all guys there.
Well, thanks, Bevan. And I wanted to say thank you to all of our panelists. It was a good hour of discussion, and I think that I think you've given us a good way to sort of kick off the PTC conference, and sort of left us with some pretty good information to think about as we start to think about the next year. And I will be excited. I will come back to our panelists and try and bring you back again this time next year, so that we can all think about what happened over the last 12 months. But thank you all for taking your time. I know that some of you was in the late hours or early hours, and it's been a terrific session. So I'll hand it back to our moderator, and thank you very much, team, and have a great year.
Bill, nice job.
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks, everyone.